Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome to Scott Sin Stuff. I recently posted a video where I talked about and demonstrated how I built my new studio, and I got a ton of questions from people. So some of the questions I never even thought of. Some I thought, well, maybe I should have covered in the original video, but just forgot. But I'm going to try and answer some of the really good questions I got about building my studio coming up next. Okay, let me see if I can go through. I got so many questions. A few people asked the same question, so I try to compile several of them. The first question from Dan Morrison: do I have any acoustic treatment plans? Yes, I definitely need, at the very minimum, I need some bass traps in here. I've got, obviously I've got enough flat surfaces in here. I do have standing waves, even though I have cupboards and or shelves and whatnot in the back there that do break up the sound enough. The room is live. So I definitely need to add some acoustic treatments. What you don't know is what you can't see in this room. This room is actually about twice or actually maybe 3 times the size of what you can see here. It's all open over there. So any treatment I do here, I'm gonna have to actually do over there, and I'm not quite sure what's gonna happen over on that side of the room yet. I would show it to you, but it's a disaster. So you just have to take my word for it that there is a huge room over that way. And am I gonna put a acoustic curtain here or panels or something to try and block off that room? I do need some things on the wall. Like I said, I need bass traps. Definitely something on that flat piece of wall back there. So yes, it's coming. I just haven't done it yet because, like I said, I haven't got really an idea of what's going to happen over in that side of the room. Craig Turberfield says, I didn't see any external FX units. Do you have any routed into the patch bay, or do you only use FX and Cubase? Currently, I only use the FX and the Cubase, and my gosh, do I have a lot of them. I have way too many plugins. That said, I have my eye on several different effects that I've wanted to get for a while. I used to have quite a bit of outboard effects, and they kind of all went away with my synthesizers. A couple I wish I really hadn't got rid of. Yes, I'd like to get some more. Of course, it's going to take up inputs on my mixer, but I could use just a single set of inputs, and then rather than having them all separately addressable, I could just patch them in the patch bay. So that's an option. I could also use the Behringer X32 has a really decent set of digital effects, and it emulates all kinds of really popular and classic effects in it. So that's probably going to happen in the future as well, that I'll set up some routing in the X32 so that I can actually route some audio out to it, run it through the effects, and then back into Cubase. Also from Craig Turberfield: what do you use as a MIDI controller keyboard? I use a Yamaha Montage 7. This is my primary keyboard, which is why you see it's like right here, front and center. It's the closest one. It's the nicest keybed of anything that I own. It's got aftertouch. It's my main keyboard. That said, for synthesizer stuff and more expressive things, a lot of the time I'm using my Hydrasynth Deluxe over here because it has that gorgeous polyphonic aftertouch keybed on it. Probably the best polyphonic aftertouch keybed that I've ever used. It's so expressive and it's so intuitive that you find yourself using it without even intending to use it. And when I'm making patches on the Hydrasynth, I tend to use the aftertouch either for a tremolo or more often for a filter. So when you push it down, the filter kind of opens up and it opens the sound up. So between those two, that's pretty much what I use for MIDI keyboards, but most of the time it's this one right here. Leon Erminoff You did a lot of work there, well done. I didn't understand how one synth can use MIDI channels from 1 to 16 and you can still use these same channels with other synths. Okay, so the reason why I have more than one MIDI channel and the reason why I have that iConnectivity MIDI router is exactly that. Synthesizers like the Montage and the Fantom, they will listen to all 16 MIDI channels. In fact, this is 16-part multitimbral, and each of the individual parts or sounds listens on its own MIDI channel. So you can't send MIDI to the Montage and then go from there to the Summit because the Montage wants to use all the channels for itself. The Summit is bitimbral. You can use 2 MIDI channels for the 2 different sounds. Same goes for the System 8, bitimbral, 2 different MIDI channels. And because I have several synths that use more than one MIDI channel, you can't use one MIDI chord that daisy chains between all of them. Instead, so I have the equivalent of 12 different MIDI interfaces built into the Mio XL. So they actually come up inside in your DAW as separate MIDI interfaces, and each one is connected to only one synthesizer. So if I send data to one synthesizer, it doesn't go to another one. You can decide which synthesizers are going to receive your transport controls or your transport commands, start, stop, and so on. Which synthesizers are going to get MIDI clocks sent to them. And that's important because some synthesizers, when they get a MIDI start, like the JD800, will start playing arpeggios or sequence. Does it have a sequence? No, it starts playing arpeggios. And let's see, there are other ones like that. I think the Cobalt, it starts playing either the sequencer or the arpeggio. And so every time you hit play on your DAW and Cubase and it sends a transport start command, all of a sudden your synths start playing stuff that you're not expecting them to. So you don't want to send transport commands to those synths. And the only way to do that is to have MIDI routes that go only to that synth and to no other synths, so that the transport commands don't get sent to the synths that you don't want to. And you got to configure that in your DAW. Other things you can do, I can do this either in the DAW, which is where I usually do it, or I can now do it in hardware in the iConnectivity Mio XL, where I could set up routing. So I could say, I want, when I play the Montage, I want it to send MIDI also to the Summit. But I don't want to send MIDI clock, and I do want to send transport controls. So that kind of stuff you can set up in the DAW. You can also configure that in the Mio XL. You can set up different preset scenes. So I could have one scene in the Mio XL that is for DAW use, where it's only going in and out and doesn't do any other routing. And then I could set up like a standalone preset in the Mio XL where I could say, okay, if I'm going to play something on here, it's going to route that to every other synth so that I can use this as a controller without even running my DAW, which is probably something I actually am going to do. All right, next question from Konstantin Pushkarev. Thanks a lot for sharing. It is also very interesting how you deal with a power supply in your studio, conditioning, UPS, etc. Thanks again. So I don't think I mentioned that in the other video, so I think what Konstantin is asking is, what am I doing for power conditioning? And the answer to that is online UPSs. A UPS, as you probably know, is a device. I've got 2 of them, one down there and one over there somewhere. The one runs the computer stuff and the mixers and so on, and one runs all the keyboards. And a UPS is a device that when the power goes out, it has batteries that take over and can keep things powered so that you don't lose what you're working on. And they also do things like sag and surge suppression. So if the voltage goes up too high, it then switches to battery. Or if the voltage sags too low, it then switches to battery voltage to prevent damaging delicate electronics. A lot of UPSs don't have true sine wave outputs, so you'll see the output is kind of stepped, like quantized, and that can generate tremendous harmonics, which is not great for delicate electronics and especially for audio equipment. So these online UPSs, they have true sine wave output where it actually, if you look at it, it looks like an analog waveform. I'm sure it's still digital somewhere, it's just much higher resolution, and as it drives the waveform up and down, it approximates a true sine wave, which is what the devices actually want. I got these UPSs through the company I was working for at the time. I don't know if they're still available. I will see if I can find some that are similar to these, the ones that I have, and I'll put a link to them in the description below. Hearts on Fire. Question: why would you run your Behringer X32 through the Yamaha MG12XU, effectively reducing your 32 channels of individual audio down to one stereo track? Why not use the Behringer as the audio interface? Okay, so I think you're definitely misunderstanding what I'm doing, and maybe that's my fault for not explaining it well enough. So I have both the Behringer X32 and the Yamaha MG32 hooked up to the computer as audio interfaces. However, there are two different ways you can actually hook up audio interfaces into at least a Windows computer. There's the Windows audio driver, and then there's an ASIO driver, and I meant to look up what ASIO stands for. Audio System Input Output, I don't know, whatever. ASIO is the one that gives you the multi-channel low latency connections that your DAW needs. And the Windows driver is the one that is used for playing video games and listening to YouTube videos and that sort of thing. So it's what Windows applications normally use. Now, Windows is not a real-time operating system. Windows is a preemptive multitasking system. So you can't be guaranteed that what you're working on is going to complete in a given amount of time. And when you're working on high bitrate multi-channel audio with very low latency, the computer could just go away and do something for a few extra microseconds and you get a dropout. That's far more likely to happen in the Windows driver, which is fairly high on the stack, shall we call it, the hardware stack. So you have, the processor, and then you have different levels of stacks until you get to the very top, which is your windowing system. And they're in different levels of priority depending on how close to the hardware they are. So Windows media or Windows drivers for your game and YouTube sound is way up here, and it can be interrupted by anything else that's more important. Whereas your ASIO is way down here. I don't know if it's kernel level, but it's close, and it's really close to the hardware. It may even have direct access to the hardware. And in fact, I think it might. And because of that, it has very high priority in what it is doing. It doesn't have to run its stuff through layers and layers of stacks and APIs. It just talks to the hardware and streams data in and out. Okay, so for that reason, the X32 with its 32 channels of in and out and low latency is what I use as the audio interface for my DAW. The Yamaha is used for everyday browsing on the internet and playing music while I'm working or whatever. The X32 does feed into the Yamaha because I'm using the Yamaha as the mixer for my monitors. And that way I can feed things like Alexa and my turntables and things into it that I just want to listen to but don't necessarily want to record. Technically, I could record the Yamaha because it is a Windows device. I could open Audacity and record 2-channel stereo audio from the Yamaha into my computer, and I've done that before. In fact, the RC505 also runs into that mixer, and in the past when I did something on the RC505 that I actually wanted to keep, that's exactly what I did. I opened Audacity, I did the thing and recorded 2 channels of stereo. But when I'm recording this stuff, it's going through the Behringer X32 directly into the DAW through that Behringer ASIO driver. Hope that answers your question. Thomas Hoffend. Okay, another question for you. What drove your purchasing decision on the Fantom 06 over the Fantom 6 or others? Well, I loved the Fantom. I was so close to actually buying a Fantom, but so I did have a Modi X7, which was super lightweight and great for taking out and playing live, but then I had the opportunity to replace it with this Montage 7, which for what I use it for in the studio is a much better fit, particularly because when I'm doing sound design or editing, I have the extra sliders here, the faders or sliders, these controls, and a lot easier access to a lot of the functions in here that don't really matter that much for playing live. I don't know that I would use a Montage for playing live. I suppose I could, but it's heavy and it's big. So when that happened, I thought, well, now what do I have for lightweight? And for a while, I was using the Gaia because it's, you know, tiny and lightweight, but still has a full-size key bed. Then Fantom came out with the 06. I already really liked the Fantom, but I couldn't justify the price. But then the Fantom 06 came out, and I just snapped it up as soon as it came out. It's lightweight. It does almost everything the Fantom does. Now, some of the things the flagship big Fantom has, such as it has built-in expansions for Jupiter 8 and the Juno 106 and the SH 101. Well, that's great, but I already have that in the System 8, so I wasn't really missing that. And I've already got a Juno 106 and an SH 101 over there, so you know, not a big deal that I was not having that in the Fantom. And when truth be told, most of the sounds that you can create on those expansions, you can create just on the base Fantom anyway, if you know what you're doing with sound design. The one thing that you don't get is Enzyme, which at first I thought, well, I really wouldn't mind Enzyme, but then I thought, I'm not gonna learn a whole nother, basically soft synth inside a hardware synth. So I thought, yeah, okay, I'm fine with the Fantom 06. It has onboard sampling, it has the sample pads, which I really like. It has a workable piano. It doesn't have the V piano, but for piano, I really use the Montage anyway. So it has a good piano for live. It's got good organs and EPs and lots of great synthesizer sounds. And it's a good all-round synthesizer. The user interface is not fabulous. The firmware upgrade process is positively heinous. Really, Yamaha has it all over rolling when it comes to user interface and design. The Fantom is just kind of everywhere. But I mean, I've got my head around it. I can use it. I'm pretty fast at it now. I really like the vocoder on the Fantom. I wish it had the ability to use all the, I think is it the VC340 or whatever those vocoder expansions are that you can get on the big Fantom, but for what it has, the vocoders on it are great. So that's how I ended up with the Fantom 06. I hope that answers your question. All right, last question from Rod Scott. This is an extraordinary video that shows on a medium to high level the details that underlie a modern studio. Well, thank you, that's very kind. My expertise is lacking and some things went over my head, but do provide a foundation for further learning, which I like, and I love to hear that. I noticed that your A-frame synth racks backed up to a wall. Is that because they lack the stability to stand in the center of the room? No, mainly it's because I don't really have the room, and it makes it easier to get to like that. I suppose I could have put them back there, you know, kind of back to back, but that would end up with some of the synthesizers way at the back, and plus it means all the cables get to run along the wall where they're not in the way. So that's the reason I put them side by side like that. Is also, I see these are 4-tier racks. Were they originally 3-tier with an additional tier added, or were they 4-tier from the get-go? Thanks for sharing. Good eye, they were 3-tier. They're on stage 3-tier stands. I added a 4th tier to both of them. Somebody else asked a question and I forgot to write it down, so I apologize, I don't have the name, but somebody else asked a question about these stands and they said, did you buy those so that you could add additional bars in between to expand it? And yes, that's exactly what I was thinking when I did that, so that if or when I have more synthesizers and I need more room, all I have to do is take that stand, push it down a ways, and then I can get some more cross pieces and just put them in between the two stands and then just put more synths in there. So yes, that was definitely the thought behind getting the identical stands. He also wanted to know why I had them so upright and why I didn't lean them back farther. And the main reason for that, let me see if I can pan this over. And the main reason for that was because when I did have them kind of out more, you couldn't get really close if you were standing because the bottom one was sticking way out here, and then you had to kind of reach and bend over like this. And particularly for ones like the wave state here, where you're going to be spending a lot of time messing around and programming and doing stuff, and my back was just killing me. So what I did is I sat and stood and really did a lot of trial and error until I got the angle right so that it worked well for sitting and for standing, and I didn't have to lean far in to get to the top ones. That's all the questions that I got that I thought were really great questions, and I am really thrilled that everyone has taken such an interest that they wanted to ask all these questions of me. If you do have any further questions, I'm glad to answer anything you want to know. Please leave them in the description below. Any other comments or suggestions, especially, I love hearing suggestions from people. Please, again, leave them in the description below. If you do like what you saw here, please click like, subscribe. Click the little bell. It really helps us out when you do that. You get notified whenever we post one of these videos. Thanks for watching.